This is the story of Bruce Jones, who walked in a shadow of hate and suspicion. The shadow of what he was because of his background, over which he had no control. This is also the story of the people who knew Bruce, or thought they did. There were many of these people, and they were different from each other in many ways.
I don't know why they let people like him go to our school anyway. And I'm not the only one. My folks don't like it a bit.
Boy, my dad made it plain I wasn't...
This educational film, made 5 years after the Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus Board that segregation in the public schools was unconstitutional, characterizes the challenges many students and schools were facing as the country moved, however slowly, towards desegregation. In 1955, the court followed up with the second ruling, known as Brown 2. That required schools to begin the desegregation process with all deliberate speed. As communities and officials debated the nuances of that phrase, a fundamental shift in American culture had begun.
Get ready, you got to move. You may be rich, and you may be poor.
In St. Mary's County, the southernmost county in southern Maryland, segregation was a way of life. There were white churches and black churches, and segregated seating in the others. There were segregated library and hospital facilities. There were separate schools, PTAs, and teacher associations, separate county fairs, 4-H clubs, beaches, night spots, and sports teams.
There were two different communities, and in many senses there still are.
When my wife and I moved here in 1954, signs were up, water signs were up, colored signs, if you want to, let's be more specific, white only. We had this type thing to deal with.
Most of southern Maryland was still rural in the 1950s, and fishing and agriculture, especially tobacco farming, were vital to the economy as they had been for over 300 years. For 2 centuries, from the mid-1600s to the mid-1800s, the tobacco economy relied on slave labor. Southern sympathies ran deep, and the Civil War, which people in some areas of St. Mary's County still refer to as the War of the Northern Invasion, created deep enmities in the county. Bitter wounds not healed by the 1950s and divides not bridged even today. But the rural, isolated community on the western shore of the Chesapeake Bay was by and large a peaceful place following the war, a place where folks lived their lives in comparative harmony and separate communities. By the 1950s, the biggest change that had come to St. Mary's since the Civil War was the establishment of the Patuxent River Naval Air Station in 1942. Known locally as Pax River, while it displaced many families from land they had long owned, the base provided a new economic engine and an influx of a more diverse workforce. Even so, military housing on and around the base remained segregated well into the 60s. And up until the 1980s and 90s in St. Mary's County, in spite of the mix of people who came with the military, diversity usually meant black and white. Not far from the base, in the unincorporated town of Great Mills, Maryland, Great Mills High School had operated as a white school since it opened its doors in 1927.
This is a picture of my graduating class, 1957. I'm right there. I believe there were 41 of us. All lily white. There were no blacks in any classes that I had all the way through school. It was not until I got into college that I had any association with minorities at all.
But as the school neared its 30th anniversary, things were about to change.
You got to move, yeah, you got to move.
When the 1954 Brown versus Board decision made forced segregation in the schools illegal, St. Mary's County Board of Education, like those in most southern communities, was not quick to comply with the ruling.
My name is Joan Groves Briscoe. My father and my mom decided to move to St. Mary's County years ago. At that time, because nobody was happy about integration, what the white people had wanted to happen was for integration to take place slowly.
The overall school system was a segregated system. And let's not forget now, we had a problem getting blacks to attend this so-called volunteer integrated system. Blacks were not climbing the fence to integrate by no means. If you want to say whites wanted to go to Carver and blacks wanted to come to Great Mill, forget it. It wasn't like that.
I was a science and math teacher in 1961. I've been with St. Mary's County Public Schools, I guess my entire career, basically. I spent 25 years here at Great Mills High School. There was a lot of interesting, I call it backward thinking, compared to how we think today as a society. But that's the way it was. That's how people thought, you know, coming up over the years. And this country has really progressed, and St. Mary's County has really progressed. We didn't have all these big shopping centers, 8-lane highways. There was 2-lane highways, a lot of roads with dirt roads. That doesn't exist anymore.
I arrived here in 1963 to start my freshman year, the year Kennedy was also assassinated. And I can remember being at Great Mills after going to private schools in Texas. And I remember sitting on Great Mills Road when they had their first parade, so it must have been Memorial Day or Labor Day. And there was no Hardee's, there was no McDonald's, there was nothing in Lexington Park.
We go to football games, you know, away from St. Mary's County, and people would say, who are these people? Where are they from?
In spite of resistance in the community, and in fact on the school board itself, in 1956, St. Mary's County public school officials responded to the Brown ruling with a plan for voluntary gradual integration of the schools to begin in the elementary grades in the 1957-58 school year. The board included Clarence Leo Young, who had been appointed in 1955 by Governor McKeldin. Young was the second African American to be appointed to serve on the board.
What it was like being on the school board was it was right rough because of the things we had to go through. Because so many people didn't want me. On the school board, the superintendent didn't want me. Oh, it was terrible. I'd been through the war. It was fun for me to go through another one.
Now I'll go back to Lawrence C. Henderson, who was the president of the NAACP at that time. And our attorneys, they had a meeting with the Board of Education, and we wanted to know why they are refusing to even consider integrating the public school system. One of them asked, why would you even consider asking to integrate the public school system, because most of you are not paying any taxes? So that answer went to our attorneys. And the next statement from that board was, I can't see what you're complaining about. Carver Heights, see, at that time the government had turned over the little Carver Heights building there, but the government left these little small toilets for the children to use. They don't know what we are complaining about, because our children have the little small toilets. So when they made that statement, the best I could do is just shake my head and say, well, we're up against a rough one.
Well, my father was an entrepreneur. He was a licensed electrician. We had been through a lot of things personally in our family. And he wanted to make a plus in our family life and in the community life. And one of the things that we all had complained about moving to St. Mary's County was that the schools weren't integrated. We were going to have to go to a colored school, and we didn't think that the black schools were in as good a shape as they should have been, and they weren't. And so my father wanted to make a difference. And so he decided to find out from the NAACP, what did he have to do?
Juanita Jackson Mitchell was our attorney. We started out with Juanita. We got 2 attorneys out of Baltimore to file suit against the local board of education.
And then it went on to an appeals court because a lot of people in the school system, a lot of white people in the school system did not want the integration. So when they lost the case that was in the regular court, they went on to the appeals court, to see if they could get it turned around. And the judge at the appeals court upheld the decision of the regular court. So that just went down the drain, and they went on with it.
The St. Mary's County Board of Education appealed the district court ruling, but federal court judge Roselle Thompson ruled in favor of William Grove's suit on behalf of his children. In September, while the appeal was still pending, and in spite of the fears of the superintendent and some on the board that moving ahead with integration could be hazardous, Joan and her younger brother Conrad entered Great Mills High School, the first African-American children to attend the white schools of St. Mary's County.
The night before, I was excited about getting my clothes ready and all my school supplies and things like that. I was excited about going to an integrated school for the first time down in St. Mary's. And when we were leaving the house to come to school, we didn't go on an integrated bus. As I remember it, the bus came and there was nobody on it except my brother and myself. And when we stood at the door of the house to come out, my mother and father came out with me, and I remember some pictures being taken. I know that there was a policeman, there was a state trooper that accompanied us to school. That's what I can remember. And on the school bus, it was just my brother and myself. That was it. That was odd. We always went to school with a bunch of kids. And when we got to school, I don't remember what happened going in. I remember, the only thing I remember is I remember some kids calling us names and saying ugly things, saying what they were going to do to us and that type of thing. Everybody was not like that, but 2/3 of everybody were like that. Because that's where they had grown up, and that's all they knew. And the poor little kids, I mean, that's all that they had ever heard. So it was, they were looking when we first came to school, see if we had tails, because they had heard that. And then they were looking to see if we, talked peculiar and funny.
During the time that Joan and Conrad attended Great Mills High School, they really did have it rough. During that time, integration wasn't accepted, and they were opening the door, an opportunity for other black kids to go down that road, but they had to experience things that we didn't experience.
The Groves family reported several threats of violence to the authorities in the weeks following Joan and Conrad's entrance into Great Mills High. And in one incident, racial slurs were spray painted on their home. Still, the family persevered and relative calm reigned at the school.
I remember from what my brother told me that I think kids may have been meaner to him than they were to me. Maybe they weren't. Maybe I just didn't pay any attention to them. As long as I got to school, as long as I got my homework, as long as I knew what was going on in the classroom, it didn't bother me about what people thought about me or what they said about me. That didn't bother me. But my brother was a different person. Each child is different. And some things bother one child, didn't bother another child. And so I think my brother really was hurt because of the way that he talked when we came home and the things that he said, people said to him. They wanted to beat him up, you know, that kind of stuff. And maybe because he was a boy, you know, he didn't want to sit back for that. I don't know.
Joan Groves graduated at the end of that first year, and her brother Conrad transferred to a private high school. At that point, the desegregation of Great Mills High School seemed to stall. Once again, the photos of sports teams, cheerleaders, student clubs, and classes seemed to show only white faces. There may have been a very few minority students enrolled, but it is not apparent in the record left by yearbooks. Even in 1964, there were fewer than a dozen black students.
Now, to make it more personal, my wife and I interceded to have our children that was in elementary school to go to Lexington Park. We had them to come to this little segregated Carver Heights with their private bus sponsored by the Board of Education, pick them up, take them back to their school each and every day, all by themselves, this great big bus. Okay? So my wife said, you know, this is ridiculous. And no, it's not. Eventually, maybe they will, see how to do it. So eventually, 1, 2, 3, 4 would join in. Hey, we're going to be a part of this.
We were going to George Washington Carver, and my father got this bright idea that he wanted to better prepare us for the real world, and he wanted to send us to Great Mills. Of course, we had nothing to say about it, so we were apprehensive, even a little frightened when we first went. And all of our fears were well-founded after we got there.
See, my children had a certain amount of protection in Carver Heights. They didn't know what that cruel world was on that base. To have a job and keep a job, even to get a job, they knew nothing about that. But for them not to be exposed to what it's like to work with Tom, Dick, and Harry, Mary, Jean, and Sue, and what it's like to be confronted with how you can be maneuvered simply because you're black, but yet you're working with a group. They didn't know anything about that. They had their little Carver Heights paradise.
At Carver, it was a family. My mother was a school teacher, and other people's mothers were school teachers. They were carpenters, whatever, ministers, and it was a family. The school was a family. So you didn't do anything in that school that you didn't think wasn't going to get back home.
Well, when we were coming up, if you talk back to your parents, you probably lost a tooth, or maybe even a shoulder, maybe even a head if you weren't real lucky.
My parents were the Reverend and Mrs. Garnett Watts, and it was my father's decision that it was time schools at that time were beginning to integrate, and then he felt that I should improve my education because he felt that the education might have been a little bit better in Great Mills. So he was the one that decided that I needed to attend Great Mills High School.
It was a problem, the way they were treated, and it was the way I expected them to be, but I also felt that they would be strong enough to deal with it. And I think they did quite well. I'm sure it wasn't easy, but it started them with a life that they had to deal with. And that's why I'm happy and proud that we sent them to that type environment so they can live with it. That's life.
I was extremely angry towards him for when he made the decision to send us to a white school. In fact, he did it to all the children that were in school. It wasn't just Charles and I. And he did it to all of us. And I really disliked him. And when we got home in the evening, he never asked us how things were going and give us a pep talk. Nothing like that. It's just, this is the way it is, and you gotta learn to deal with it. Then like I said, I really had some real negative feelings towards him. But now I look back at what he's been through, and I have a much better understanding of what he was trying to do, and he was trying to prepare us.
I didn't want to leave George Washington Carver because George Washington Carver had all my friends, and I was just used to that school. I had been going to that school since kindergarten, and first grade at the time. So I was getting ready to enter the 9th grade, and that was a long time at one school, and I just did not want to leave that school. But when parents decide what you got to do, you have to listen to your parents.
Well, black going to a white school, which, their school hadn't been fully integrated at the time, so you knew where you were, and you left it at that. You had to go to school. The first year, you didn't feel that comfortable. You didn't feel totally at home, but you still were going to school. With my parents, you're going to school, so.
The attitudes of the white kids at the school when we started there, we would walk down the hallways, and someone would get up against the walls and stuff like, we were diseases. We could walk in the classrooms. They would open up the windows because they said it was an odor coming in. As we go down the hall, sometimes we would be called the N-word. It was, it was just small little things that they did.
Oh, we had been shoved and verbally threatened. Usually the teachers and Mr. Moses, the vice principal, would monitor the situation, so it never really got out of hand. So we were protected.
We all kind of basically stuck together because we were more comfortable, I guess, around ourselves. A lot of us were separated in the classrooms. We had different classes. But when we had a chance to meet up together or during lunch, at lunchtime, we always ate together.
I was an A-B student when I was at Carver, but when I went to Great Mills, my grades fell off drastically. A lot of it was because of the distractions that I was subjected to, the harassment, the name calling. It's hard to focus in a class when you have to go through that every day.
We had some wonderful teachers. The principals were remarkable. At the time when I first started there, Mr. Marvin Joy was the principal, Mr. Duke, and Mr. Moses. The teachers we had, they were kind of still a little negative about it.
Well, some people had difficulty adapting, but I came from a multicultural society. I went to PS 127 in New York City, and then when I came to Great Mills High School, things were a little bit different, and people had difficulty adapting, and those people that could not adapt just left, and that was fine.
We had one teacher that one day, point blank, told us that we should return back to our schools. We shouldn't be there. We should go back to where we belong, you know.
Yeah, quite honestly, I can't remember having any bad situations with teachers. For the most part, at least they gave me the impression that they were doing their jobs and trying to protect me. All the negativity came from students.
One time we were in class and we were walked in the classroom, and when we walked in, the teacher was in the room and he turned around and looked right at us and said, "Well, we have several N's in the class today. Let's welcome them in."
I remember the teachers being very kind and very good to us. There were only a few teachers that had segregation on their mind.
They were much different because the black teachers, when I went to Carver, it was one positive thing about them. They made sure that we were taught very well. They were very good about giving us education. They took time with us. At Great Mills, it was much different. The teachers there weren't. They didn't show as much concern towards our education as the black teachers did.
We went through this for about a year before they integrated schools. And by then they had started to kind of accept us, you know, we've been there a while. And then they integrate schools and they bring all these other black students over. And then we're kind of like caught in the middle. You know, we've established some relationships, so our black friends think that we've sold out. And I was glad to get out of high school and just leave that whole mess behind me. It was what an enjoyable time. I learned a lot about how to interact with people. And now that I think back on it, that was an extremely important thing to learn.
Truth shall make us free. Truth shall make us free. Truth shall make us free someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe.
The passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed segregation in public places, employment, and housing. It empowered the federal government to cut funding to schools that continued to segregate their students. And in the fall of 1966, St. Mary's County began to dismantle its segregated system. In the 1967-68 school year, the school board established a single system with non-racial attendance zones and a policy to employ, assign, and dismiss teachers and staff without regard to race, color, or national origin.
We knew in the spring that Washington Carver was coming.
We were in our second year before the school was actually integrated. I came here my first year, and there were absolutely no African Americans at all. No teachers, no administrators, no students, nobody. And there was, as I was saying a little earlier, there was consternation in the summer. You know, word was out, newspapers, that the integration was going to happen.
The community had meetings to discuss incoming integration. There were objections on both sides, both the white community and the black community. And it became very heated.
School year started, and in my life, it was perfect. I mean, here were these people who were giving up their background, giving up their school, and coming to be part of Great Mills High School. And there were a lot of us who thought it was just really, really important to welcome these wonderful people, and they were. They were high school students just like the rest of us. And we had the opportunity to have teachers who were now a reflection of our community. We had Dolores Fleming and Grace Williamson and Mr. Moore and Mr. Herndon, and they brought a vitality to the school. And it was a wonderful time, I think, at Great Mills High School.
When we came in September in those days, right after Labor Day, when we came to school, back to school, we saw, first of all, African American teachers, and we saw African American students in the school. And I'm pleased to say it turned out to not be a big deal.
There was no problems. Everybody sees the story, the movie Remember the Titans, where everybody's throwing rocks at buses and this and that. There was nothing like that. Our parents worked, and they weren't to be pulled off the base or their businesses for any problems. And unless there was a couple remarks that might have been said by somebody, there was no issues. There was no fights. There was no name calling. Our job was to get everybody welcomed into Great Mills High School, and let's get going on with the curriculum and get ready for graduation.
We'd already had student elections for our class officers for 66, 67, and a group of us felt that it would only be fair for us to somehow or another come up with a way to have the seniors from George Washington Carver have more of a role in the life here at Great Mills High School. And so Curtis Kane was elected the vice president of the Student Government Association. And the students were getting along famously and participating in sports together and clubs together. We did the play South Pacific, and as a matter of fact, we had interracial dating even at that early time.
Well, this is a switch. A week ago you were up in the air about having to go to the same school with him.
But you know, if you look at the 65-66 yearbook, there are African American students in the yearbook at that time, but not many. And then if you look at the 66-67 one, you know that the world has changed.
We asked students, did they know that Great Mills was integrated, and did they know what the word stood for? And surprised that most of the students didn't know that Great Mills had to be integrated, and that they didn't know what the word segregation meant.
I would have to say that in this area of St. Mary's County, probably what helped it more than anything else was the Navy. The military went through integration long before the civilian community did. And so what you had here was sort of a community that was already somewhat accustomed to that.
The base itself just fell in line with what we had. That's the way it was. One segregated system.
The white community was, my perception, was a little bit more upset about us coming here than the black community was. The black community was, yeah, go forward. Now you have a true chance to achieve your goal and make something out of your life that they couldn't. Because you have to remember, a lot of our parents did not have formal education. They did not make it past the 5th grade. My father only made it to the 3rd grade. We were their hope of moving forward, moving the family forward. We brought our gifts and our talents to the school, and we were hoping that they would be accepted and received in the same manner in which we were willing to give them. Unfortunately, a lot of the time it wasn't. And, you know, it just made us have to work just that much harder to be able to succeed here at Great Mills High School.
In the late 1960s and the early 70s, the country was in great turmoil. The civil rights, anti-war, and fledgling women's liberation movements brought people into the streets, and the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy rocked the nation. Reverberations were felt even in rural St. Mary's County.
The big issue that was coming up at the time was the whole Vietnam War. And I think at that time, and what was happening in Indochina, and I think what was happening, we were more concerned about that. That was a concern here at the school. It was certainly a concern when I went off to college.
I come right through the time when segregation was right on the tail end of things, or at least we thought that it was on the tail end of things. Discrimination still seemed to be in place considerably. For me, as well as a lot of my friends that were athletes, we didn't notice it as much because athletes basically don't see discrimination for the most part. What they see is what element or what piece of the puzzle does it take for us to win. I guess it was 1980 when I came back home from college. I thought things had changed a little bit, and I turned out to be the first black to play in the white leagues. Actually, in all the areas it was at that time was integrated. You just didn't realize it as much because everybody still stayed off into their own section of the woods pretty much. I'll never forget going in the, back then it was Toots Bar, and they said you couldn't come in the front door, you had to go into the side door. And the guys on the softball team said we all either go in the front door or we don't go in.
In May 2004, in celebration of the 50th anniversary of Brown versus Board, students at Great Mills presented scenes based on interviews they had conducted with former students, teachers, and administrators who experienced the desegregation process at the school.
The reaction of the audience was, I felt that it was good. They felt that we like pinpointed some of the stuff that went on in Great Mills, but some people felt that it was a little sugar-coated.
But you have only scratched the surface, baby. There's so much more there. There are things that are still too painful for Francine to tell you. They're different. The children that graduated between 68 and 78, if you really look at them, and I look at them and I talk to them, they're different because they had to grow up in a hurry. They had to make the mature decisions in a hurry. They were not permitted to be children.
I wanted to see more of the academic struggle or the social struggle, the pain, because it still was pretty painful. Integration, for me, became more painful as I went up in the grades. The first year of integration for me was like previous years. It wasn't any big to do. But as I got older in the school system, and perhaps it might have been because I was more academic, and perhaps even because of the competition with regards to academic honors, it became more of a struggle for me. When it had to be proved that I really did deserve the French award, because people questioned me getting the French award because there was a black teacher, then that was traumatic for me because I couldn't understand the questioning of her integrity, and I certainly couldn't question my intelligence. I couldn't understand why people were questioning that I could have earned. So I didn't see, not that it had to be my life, but I didn't see that kind of struggle.
I was teaching in Esperanza most of the 60s, and we used to have an awards assembly every year at the end of the year. And I taught mathematics, and when I turned in the award for Algebra 2, I was called down to the office by the principal, and he told me I had to pick another awardee, and because we couldn't possibly give it to Francine Dove. And Francine Dove was one of my Algebra 2 students, and the principal said there was no way that a black could be the best, and I had to pick somebody else. And I wasn't very, well, I usually did what the principal said, but I didn't do that. And I was determined. Francine was the best I had in the class, and I was determined she was going to get the award. And one of the first times in my life that I really dug in, and Francine got the award. The principal didn't like it much, and I came to Great Mills not too long after that.
When did you start teaching here, Zora?
I came here in '72.
Gosh, 70s. Yeah, 1968, we lose Martin Luther King, we lose Bobby Kennedy, and between 68 and those early 70s, things really changed here at Great Mills High School, and it wasn't the place that it had been. It was a shame.
For me, it was pretty scary in those times. Walking the halls, there would be fights that would break out, and everyone would either circle or try to get out of the way. The halls were crowded. They started a lot of bomb threats.
In the early 1970s, there were incidents, a few of them violent, that occurred at Great Mills. Among those interviewed, the unrest was variously blamed on overcrowding, on normal competitive friction between groups of young men, and on a growing disappointment among black students that the promises of integration were not fully met. The most frequent charge from the African American community was of discrimination and disciplinary measures.
There was some unrest at the time, and we worked very hard trying to get the black students and the white students together. And when we started hiring black faculty, that really helped because the students, both white students and black students, began to see that we had white teachers and black teachers working together and teaching, subjects. And things improved tremendously, and that was good.
It's a shame that in the late 60s, early 70s, that things went so far astray. I guess it was maybe familiarity breeds contempt, I don't know, but I can walk into Great Mills High School and I can feel good when I'm here and walk by and know where my senior locker was, know where my sophomore and junior classes were. But a lot of the students that I graduated with were here for 1 year, and they don't have that same feeling about Great Mills that I do, and that's a sad thing. They don't have that history.
It's funny, I never stopped to think there could be a Bruce's side to it. I just never really thought of Bruce at all.
You get different stories, like some of the people that were interviewed were saying that like Great Mills was horrible, it was this, it was that, but then you get some teachers that say like, oh, it was nothing, there was nothing wrong with Great Mills, there was no problems, but then you get people that say it was terrible, there's a lot of problems, stuff like that, so you don't know which one to believe. Like Ms. King said, it's like coming from memory. It's like you can never get that one story.
Well, you know what, with me, I know mine are going to be different than some of my black counterparts because my change was drastic. I mean, I went from a black school to a white school when we were still segregated. So I believe me, I remember the differences. It was like being thrown out in a river. You know, you've been in a 90-degree temperature, then they move you to Alaska and throw you in a cold river. It's quite a transition.
I don't remember there being a lot of racial problems. There were problems between kids, but it was just kids being kids.
Well, you know, Zora, I think it's because you and I are of the same mindset, and that we at least I have surrounded myself with people who think the same way that I think and who have the same value system. So if someone around me, even when I was a senior in high school, was going to make any kind of racial comments, then I didn't want to be around that person. And so I created an environment that reflected my perception of the world, and I think you probably have done the same thing.
The highs were the kids that were, the kids and the teachers that were so kind to me. I really remember that. I really do. The ones that wanted to help me with my schoolwork, that wanted to help me to have a friend in class, the ones that treated me like I was a human being and not an animal. I remember that. That was great.
I think the reason why there was a smooth transition between Carver and Great Mills High School was because Lexington Park being a small community like it was back then, everyone knew everybody. Everybody got along with everybody. Where I came from in Texas was a lot different. The blacks had their own part of town that they had to shop in. And when I came up here and saw everybody was together, I was totally shocked because that's not the way I was raised.
Going through high school at Great Mills was quite a learning experience for me, simply because I got a chance to see the segregation side as well as the integration, and I got a chance to see the transition of the two, which I think was really a great opportunity for me because I'd been on one side constantly and had never been around very many whites growing up in the areas that I grew up into. And just to come out there and have a perception of what they were compared to what they actually turn out to be was incredible.
I'm glad for having had the experience to integrate a school. I'm glad for having gone to Great Mills. I'm not sorry one bit. I'm glad for every teacher and all of the experiences that we had. I don't regret it at all. I'm not sorry. I'm happy about it. And having heard over the years all the black kids that have gone to Great Mills and the other schools, I'm so happy for them. I really, really, really am. To come to an integrated school, I know it's better for us than to just have to go to a black school and use old textbooks and not have the best of everything to learn from. I don't know what the kids are doing with it now. I hope they're utilizing it.
I found it very worthwhile. It was a good experience to know, to see the background of what everybody had to go through to get you to where you are. Not just to think it, but live it, like act it out. So I think it was a very good experience.
Our history is such that we couldn't read, we couldn't write, but we would pass on the stories. And I think that that passing on of the stories will allow for the children who are more into the rapping and stories to become more motivated about it. I don't think, I'm not optimistic about them reading the stories, but I am more hopeful that eventually they'll get to want to hear the stories.
We loved everybody. We respected our parents to the utmost, and we respected our teachers. And we enjoyed going to school. We know when we went to school, we were getting something out of it. We were bettering ourselves.
There was a period of time that I really hated white people. They had a black militant group here in St. Mary's County. It was like the Black Panthers. I joined that. Quite angry. I eventually grew out of it. And, you know, walking around with anger serves no purpose. I did better once I accepted it and tried to understand why they felt that way. And most of them had just been taught. They never had any kind of relationship with a black person. It's just based on what they've been taught. And that's one thing my father always instilled in us too. Serves no purpose to get angry. You make real bad decisions when you're angry. You'll always regret it. So I got past it. Even got past my anger towards my father.
Hey, look where we came from. Look how far we have gone in respect as to what segregation was really about and where are we now. You have no other choice but to live. And that does not mean you agree with it, but you still have to live as an individual. So, with the results of that, I still feel that St. Mary's County is A-OK. I have no problem.
We didn't have to go through as much as the kids did in Selma, Alabama, and all those different places. We didn't experience that. It was much different here. It wasn't as hard for us. So it's like, I guess we have to say thanks to Joan and Conrad for opening that door for us, that we didn't experience what the other kids did in the South. Because they experienced some things a lot worse than we did. A lot worse.
It is true that the desegregation of Great Mills High School came without jeering crowds, belligerent politicians, or police barring the door. There were no dogs, no fire hoses. It is a quiet story. Many of the people who lived the experience have fond memories from that time. But it is also true that there were many who received wounds to the spirit that were deep and lasting. We must recognize and honor those wounds as we celebrate the progress we've made and press ahead in the struggle.
When I grew up, we had no opportunity to associate with minorities. And when you don't understand something, you tend to fear it. And until you learn about your environment, until you learn about the people in the environment and get an understanding of them, you will have this fear.
I didn't realize what a struggle it was for the students who went through the desegregation. I always kind of assumed that Great Mills had always been the way that it was. And I think it kind of explains some of the relationships that the students have here at Great Mills in terms of some students seem to want to segregate themselves, whereas other students seem very willing to have friendships with all types of people.
Experience dealing with integration is actually fabulous. I have a lot of diverse friends and family members in Great Mills, and at first I used to feel awkward because I was in a lot of AP and honors classes, being the only black person in the class, but over my years there have been more African American students in my AP classes.
I'm graduating in like about 2 weeks now, and it's really an overwhelming feeling. It's been a long time coming, and just from hearing the stories about my dad and my aunts and uncles, I feel privileged and proud to graduate from Great Mills, since we're so deeply enriched by the tradition.